I'm Sarah Romson-Galloway. I work for YouthLink Scotland as um, I've got the Equalities Remit at YouthLink Scotland basically. And my main program that I run there is Action on Prejudice, and that's my old job title. I think I've just seen it on the website too, so I've asked my colleague to fix that. But it's the EDI Senior Development Officer is my role at the moment. Um, as part of that, I do deliver a lot of training around every type of prejudice and discrimination, I think, on the planet. And I'm going to try and take you through just a few little things today that might help you start these conversations, shall we say. And one of them is around creating safe and brave spaces. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Kirsten? Might be 2 slides along. Yep, and again. There we go. So what is a safe and brave space? To me, it's a space that empowers young people to speak about the issues that impact them. But I'd like to hear from you what you think the key elements of creating a safe or a brave space are. You might not have heard the term brave space before. It is being used more and more often. But rather than it just being a space that's safe, where there's no discrimination, it's also a space where you can start to speak up and are ready to be challenged. But what do you think are the key elements for creating a safe or brave space? And if you could put that in the chat box, just your initial thoughts when you hear those words, that'd be great. You able to contribute, yeah. Trust, definitely. You need to build trust. Respect. Putting in a group agreement. Rebecca, you're way ahead of me. In terms of, look at my slides later, I feel like. Same thing. Being comfortable with no distractions. No distractions is actually a really good point. The idea of if you're coming into a space, people maybe pop the phones away for a little while, or make sure that you're not going to get interrupted by people unless it's something like fire evacuation. But yeah, it's a hard one to sort of create because it does look different. And I will put this out: a safe and brave space will look different for every group of young people because it has to be safe and brave for them. And the other key part of it is that second sentence there is about a space where everyone participating agrees to actively engage, but also acknowledging that everyone's human, that everyone will have an opinion, that we may all have differing opinions, that we go in and we're ready to be challenged. And we are ready to challenge as well without, I wouldn't say sort of without prejudice in a way, like that idea of coming in and going, right, we're going to have a discussion, we're going to have a debate. We're going to try and walk away not being massively offended by each other, and essentially we might walk away agreeing to disagree. But we've had an opportunity to share thoughts and opinions and try and understand where we're all at. But a tool I've used in my introduction to racial literacy training is on the next slide, and I think is quite a handy tool to use. I quite like. I just like it. Kirsten, could you move along? Thanks. Is this pyramid? I like a pyramid generally because I feel like that you're building up towards something and you're developing. But it always starts, these conversations, they always start with critical love. And it's that, I don't know if it's very small, it's quite small for me at the moment, so I'm going to look at my big screen. But critical love is around that sort of profound ethical commitment to caring for the communities in which we work. Now, I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of youth workers have already made that commitment before they even started this kind of discussion, having a controversial discussion at all. So we're already on that pyramid. We're already started our journey up. Then we look at critical humility and that idea of remaining open to understanding the limits of our own worldviews and ideologies, and critical reflection, thinking through the various layers of our identities and how our privilege or marginalized statuses affect the work we do. Now, a lot of that is a little bit work. We need to understand what our views are. We need to understand what our ideologies are. We need to understand what our prejudices and biases are. And we need to know where we're at before we can have a discussion with a young person. In the group we talked about before, we talked about playing devil's advocate and being able to argue either side of the argument. which is a really key skill to have, but we don't all have that. So if we at least know where our limits are, we can then start to know that actually we need to end the conversation here and we need to go learn more. Or we need to get a little bit of support in. And having done that reflection is really key to that. And that is actually part of our role. The pyramid then goes on to historical literacy, archaeology itself, and interruption. And a lot of that is around understanding the communities that we're working with. So understanding the community that these young people come from, understanding what their views may be before you have that conversation, maybe know a little bit about the history or the issues that they're facing already. And the issue you're discussing itself, if you already know what it is going to be before they come in, doing that reading up beforehand. So on the next slide, we've got the youth worker's role in this, so that we'll go into that a little bit more. Kirsten, if we get the next slide. There we go. So for me, when I talk about this quite often, I talk a lot about that self-directed learning. I've mentioned that on an issue or on the community impacts, just to have even a baseline understanding, knowing your own prejudices and biases, keeping the discussion as factual as possible. And that can be quite difficult to do at times, especially in a world where the internet is full of misinformation. But as youth workers, we can sort of start to go through this process of explaining to young people that maybe looking at different sources for information, seeing what facts we know, maybe they have different facts that contradict ours, and doing a bit of research around that. Maybe later on, again, that's maybe a point to go, right, let's part this part of the conversation, we'll do some research and then we'll come back to it. And then someone mentioned before, having those group understandings are crucial to reference back to. So these are what set your boundaries. Don't let it get personal. When it gets personal, let someone call you out. Even if you tell the young people, call me out if I've got personal. And that gives them power. Puts you on the level playing field. You've all agreed to the same thing, and you're not going to be clashing heads as much. And young people still feel safe and brave to be able to have that conversation with you maybe later on if they need to have a further discussion with you one-to-one. There's a lot to do. This will look different. I will admit it will look different in every community you go to. It might be that the safe and brave space for some is a women-only space. For some, it might look very different to that. Maybe it's actually for someone who has a personal carer, it might be, or a personal assistant, it might be important that that person is in with them as well. So considering that is really crucial to creating the spaces. But it will look different every time. And I think you do need to sort of investigate and work with the young people you're talking to and wanting to have a discussion with as to what this will look like for them too. Now, we're going to do a little bit of interactivity. I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of reflection because I don't like telling people, go do reflection and then not tell them how you can do this. So on the next slide, what time are we on? Right, stop the share. I've got a game. I call it a card game or the Wheel of Institutions, and I'll put these links in the chat afterwards. But I would like you to think about we've got a Wheel of Institutions, we've got a Wheel of Protected Characteristics, and I think I might share my screen in a moment if I can, and I'll spin the wheels on my screen, and it'll come up with an institution and a protected characteristic. And I'd like you to think about what have you grown up learning about this protected characteristic from this institution. So you don't need to justify it. You might have a completely different view now. You might have done a lot of learning and changed your view. But have a think. I'm hoping it's going to come up one because it came up with some rubbish ones yesterday when I did this. But just have a think about it and think about the next stage of that then is to think about what impact does that have on your work now? What impact, what made you change? What helped you change your views maybe? If your views have changed, they might not have. And then you start to think about that, okay, how does this learned belief or learned attitude or whatever it is impact my work with young people now? Let's see if I can share my screen. Fingers crossed this works. It doesn't always. Right, there we go. I've got them both. I can show them both. Share. So hopefully, can I get a thumbs up from at least Betsy and Charlotte? You can see it. Yep, there we go. Yep. Right, so I'm going to spin the institutions. Oh, I get a sound effect. I don't know if you can hear that. Oh, government. What does the government tell you or has taught you about what really does have full-on sound effect? Disability. So the question is, what has, I don't know if anyone else can hear that clapping. Good. I'm glad you do. But think about what has the government, whether you're growing up, this could be local government, national government, it could be Westminster if you want it to be, it could be EU if you want it to be, told you about disability or what they think about disability. Now, if you feel up for it, you're welcome to just take your mic off mute and say it out loud. You can share it in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable doing, or not say it at all. But just take a minute to think about what has this institution told you about this protected character. So what's government told you about disability over the years? And I can share my view as well. For me, I started when I moved up to Edinburgh. I worked, oh, there's people putting stuff in the chat. Sorry, I didn't see that. It was growing up not growing up in Edinburgh, working in Edinburgh, and local government basically prioritised buildings over access. Which for me at the time, trying to run a venue was a massive issue and one I'd never even thought of before. Yeah, someone showing out Invisible have now been finding out more about disability literacy. Yeah. Quite the other one I've seen is a local authority putting trees. You know, we're trying to be green, quite very green in areas which we should be, but planting a tree on a curb in front of a dropped curb, meaning that there's no access for a pram or it could be a pram. For me, it's usually a pram or a wheelchair or any kind of sort of mobility device to get then up onto that pavement safely. There's a lack of joined up thinking quite often when we put these things together. So someone else is showing extra resource needed to deal with disability, which they don't have and won't necessarily commit to. It's quite often, and I agree with that topic about being invisible. Disability was invisible for me growing up. Certainly, local government didn't make it easy for people with disabilities to get jobs, to actually try and contribute to the economy. They were just honest. I think I was at one point basically told, well, they're just hidden away and they're, scrounging on benefits. They're not trying to make a difference. When actually people are. They really want to get involved in society. So yeah. Should I spin the wheel one more time? I've got time for that. I think so. And see hopefully we'll come up with something different. Health is always a difficult one. Let's see, hopefully it doesn't come with disability. Religion. That is quite a difficult one. Health and religion. So the health system and religion. Health is always a difficult one to start addressing. But it could be your local GP, it could be a hospital, it could be a midwife's appointment or a health visitor, or the dentist, if need be. Anyone share? Just it's a difficult one for me, but the one that's popped into my head just now for me was around certain groups being harder to reach or engage. People knowing about the health system, and then clash of values and beliefs. So I was thinking about the form I had to fill out recently, the consent form for my daughters at school, and at the moment it talked about blood transfusions and whether I did or did not give consent for blood transfusions. And what I grew up seeing at times was that being ignored for some groups because the medical view was taken as being a priority over the religious belief. So that sort of historical and I'm going to say historical because I don't think it happens anywhere near as often now. But that historical view for me was, I knew somebody who was actually afraid to go to the hospital or afraid to send their child on, allow their child to go on excursions because they were worried that their religious beliefs would be ignored, despite it all being in all the paperwork. And FGM is an interesting example as well, when you put that idea of faith and that very contradicting view with FGM together as well. That's fun. That is a bit much for the few minutes we've got, but it's maybe cultural, not religious, but it's claimed as being religious as well. It's both at different times depending on the community as well. But I can put the links to these in the chat as well. So if you do want to have a go at it at home yourselves, or you want to have a go at it with some young people, feel free to. It can lead to some interesting discussions. The other way I use it, trying to find the stop share button, is I usually have them written on little cards. I do. No, they're not there. But little cards, and I hand the cards out. Like, I've got two rows in front of me. One row of people on one side get the institutions, the other get the protected characteristics, and then each pair has that discussion together. It can be quite fun and a bit different. It gets people up on their feet. I've got two more slides to just have a very quick talk through before I'm done. Kirsten, can you share them again? Right. Thank you. Go skip straight to Maya Angelou. Fine. This is a quote I found very recently, and it just summed a lot up for me. So, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. We can't be expected to know everything about everything. So when we have these safe and brave spaces, we can create them, but they're safe and brave for us as well as for young people. I think it's really important to consider that. And we don't know everything. We may have learned one set of language that was right 10 years ago, but maybe we've not been updated with the newest language, and that's okay. And if you have a space where a young person can challenge you and say, if it's me, Sarah, that's not the word we use now, that's not right, that's really offensive, you can go, oh, I'm really sorry, what is the right terminology for you? And then I can do better because now I know better. Do what you can with what you know, and when you but be open to learning. And I think this summed it up for me really well at the time. And on my last slide, I've got two more activities. I'm not going to do them with you just now, but they're great ones to get these conversations started. And I use these, you primarily use these when talking about sectarianism, but you've got your safe and brave space. Now, how do you just start the conversation? And for me, doing an A to Z is a really good way of getting all the language out, getting all the words and all the terminology out into the open, addressing it, unpicking it, having a conversation around it. And then if you wanted to, depending on what the issue is, develop a definition that is relevant to the young people who are in that group. It started off as an A to Z of alcohol. It is more often used now as an A to Z of sectarianism, but really it can be used for any topic or any protected characteristic or whatever you want to do. Basically on either flip chart paper or on a board, depending on if you're doing it in small groups or in a big group, put on all the letters of the alphabet and try and come up with a word for every letter of the alphabet. It takes about 20-25 minutes, depending on how much you want to unpick it and how big the topic is. But if you've got a group who are sitting there silently and you can't quite get the conversation started, get it all out. Get it all out on a bit of paper that you can chuck in the bin afterwards or rip up or whatever you want to do. But the key part of that is that you're really open to the language that comes out, and you basically have the language doesn't go out of this room. Chatham House rules to a certain extent. You allow them to use the bad language, and you unpick it and you explain why, or you have a conversation about why this is inappropriate. I'm very much someone who believes in naming something to be able to address it and to be able to challenge it. Because if we just talk around the topic, we don't get anywhere, and we don't know we're on the same page. So it's a good way to get everyone started and knowing that everyone's on the same page and we know where we're at. The other thing, I've asked you to think about doing some self-reflection yourselves. You might find yourselves in a position where you want young people to do that, the same, especially when it comes to some really difficult and controversial issues. And doing a circle of influence is something that can really help with this. So it's a reflective exercise where you have 3 circles that are like on the image there. You put yourself in the middle and you think about who has influenced me. What systems, what is it, media, is it family, friends, or is it very specific people? Who influences me the most goes in the first circle, a little bit less in the second, and the least in the third circle. So when we're talking about influence, we're talking about the people, who does it matter what they think of me? Who does it matter to you what they think of you? Sorry. Who says something you believe it straight away? Who do you not believe? Who would you take it? If you're moving further out, the pinches of salt with what they say get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a great way to sort of understand where your opinions and thoughts and develop where your knowledge comes from as well to a certain extent, and whether that's misinformation or not. I find it a really useful activity to sort of get it out, and it's one you can do with young people as individuals, as or as pairs. I wouldn't necessarily do it as a big group because it then loses its ability to actually be reflective. But then again, if you have a group where you feel that would be the most appropriate way to do it, then please do. Both of these activities are found in the resource Beyond a Culture Two Halves on the Action Sectarianism website. But you'll see them in lots of other resources probably down the road. If you've seen a lot of youth work resources, you'll probably find them in there too. But they are great. I love them. I think they're great. And hopefully that will get your conversations started now that you've created your safe and brave spaces.